an incubation business have to be fundamentally different than the measurement systems for, rest of the business, right? So what happens many times is that, hey, you look at this, you're doing some, management review, right? And you say, well, that thing is, sucking up a lot of resources, but it's not generating revenue. Of course not. The measurements have to be different. So you end up being a black sheep, right? So that's where creating a separate entity and a focus on incubation becomes important. So those were some examples.
All right, great. So we're still on the topic of what goes wrong. Just what do people have to watch out for? They're starting to build their momentum.
Yeah, we also put together an incubator within SAP. There's a global business incubator that exists right now. One of the things that we observed in terms of the, I won't even say entrepreneurial experiences, but the innovation initiatives over SAP over the last 40 years. I mean, there's a couple of innovation drop points. One from concept to actual delivery. There's a concept team that hands over the concept to a delivery team. It's a different team. Something always goes wrong there. But we actually had an example, I think, in the early 2000s, which was something called SAP Markets, and it was something, it was an initiative, which was, it was a multi-million-dollar kind of revenue-generating type of idea, but it was the classic innovator's dilemma where it was kind of competing and competing against some of our billion-dollar kind of markets and initiatives, right? So I think, as technical people, sometimes we don't take a look that far into the future, even if we kind of develop a great product or service. We have to understand what the channel to market is, and if you're within the large organization, is that going to conflict against the 20,000 people in SAP that were earning commissions, selling things a certain way, and squashing you because you've got a great idea, but it's distracting them, it's distracting the customer from
Right.
the bigger picture.
So there's some judgment about how much disruption the organization can stomach. Maybe like a little bit might be okay, but too much, they're just not gonna absorb it.
I think that's when we were researching, the different things. One thing we liked about the Cisco model was, this notion of one level of adjacency away from the core business. So I think one or two. If you're too close, then the organization is definitely going to kill it. If you're a little bit away, then you have some way to actually create a channel to market that's not in conflict with your existing business.
Okay, wonderful. Do you have a comment on things that go wrong?
I mean, I want to support with what Sam said. I mean, it really is. If you don't have a good go-to-market channel, that'll kill it. It's not just the product. It's just like if you're an entrepreneur, just because you have a great product, you have no marketing sales, it's not going to work. So same thing inside the company. So once you have the product, then you got to work that issue. And and there are a lot. I'll say this. There are a lot of young companies that Cisco acquires. Okay, and a lot of, I'll say most of them that I'm aware of fail inside Cisco because it turns out it doesn't fit with the way that Cisco takes things to market. And one thing that we did when we were acquired by Cisco was that most of my time was really working the internal issues. It had nothing to do with, I dealt with customers and had to deal with integrating into Cisco. And if that had not, if I had not spent the time doing that, it would have failed. And I think certainly the lesson from Andiyama was applied to Nuovo, where they hired essentially somebody who essentially did the same job I did, which basically prepare that go to market into the company. So that would have been the biggest failure of the experience.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with the go-to-market element being a big deal. I mean, in the consumer space, it's not so much who is your sales team. It's how are you going to get traffic? How are you going to actually get this exposed to people? And so there are different route to market issues, but I'd agree with that one. I think the other one that is kind of this is where I think that our company has struggled a little bit, and we're trying to be better about this. Is when do you call it and move on? And I think that's a hard one because as an entrepreneur and having started a couple of companies, and if you have that in you and you work with people who are starting things, it is actually very difficult to be dispassionate about this and look at an idea or progress as as a dead end. I mean, usually ideas don't make they don't make zero progress, right? They make some progress, and that's always encouraging, right? And so the question is that enough progress, and over what period of time? And so one of the things we've had to get much better about, frankly, and this is where things can go wrong sometimes, is about expectation management, just in terms of, what are the experiments we're going to, we try to be very data driven, so, what are the experiments we're going to run? What are the things we're going to do to try to get real data that, and we kind of try to decide on this up front, to set everyone's expectations. And actually the thing that we found has helped the most is just to go to the team that's actually working on this and say, what is the bar? They come up with pretty high bars. It's pretty amazing, because people don't want to actually work on something for a really long time that isn't going to go anywhere. And once they've already done it for a year, it's much harder for them to get out of it. But in the beginning, they're kind of actually pretty upfront and more dispassionate about it. We found that's pretty helpful. But that can go wrong if you don't do it upfront.
Okay, all right, so that's really interesting. I mean, on one hand, there's the team side of this, where you're making them set their own expectations, and you're saying they'll naturally raise them high. And the other side of that was, with the management, it sounds like you're saying, and maybe this is just Google culture, maybe you don't have to actively do it, but to the extent that you can take a page out of this story, it sounds like you're setting expectations by saying, and our next experiment is, not saying this is going to work, or not saying this is what we're going to get out of it, but kind of getting them to buy into the experimental, almost pivot-like process to get yourself to the venture.
It depends on the team at Google, but for most teams, most of the things we try don't succeed. They don't see the light of day really externally. We run lots of 1% traffic experiments on all kinds of ideas. Sometimes we launch products that are invite only, and we shut them down. We do a lot of this kind of thing. So I think there is just maybe an expectation on the part of people who are working on this that is, it actually, the bar is pretty high to succeed in the consumer space. Is kind of a lot of things that stay at like 1 million users. There's not a lot of things that go to 100 million users, and so there is that expectation setting. I think that happens naturally, but I still think it's hard, because the dots between 1 million users and 100 million users is not always a linear line. You're always waiting, and all of a sudden something pops, and it's like, well, what is that thing that's going to make this thing pop? And everyone thinks it's around the corner sometimes when you're a year into something, or 9 months or 6 months into something, and you've worked really hard on it, and that's a difficult thing for anyone to navigate.
Yeah, and that sounds like that's a bit of the issue with consumer, is that you have to try so many different things to find that kind of rare event. Here, actually, I'll give you a story. Like, I've heard this story of the guys who started Guitar Hero, and they were visiting a Japanese game company, and they went and told them that we're working on this game, and it's going to be a huge hit. And so they're talking to the executive, and he's up on like a high floor. He opens up the window into like where all the people are working down there, and he says, "See that? There's 500 people working down there, and they're working on, I don't know, like 100 different games." And he says, "One of those is going to be a big hit, and if I knew which one, I would get rid of all the other people." Right? I mean, it's kind of like, to some degree, you have to actually just do a lot of experiments in certain types of businesses. Yeah, but not
exactly. So it's interesting what you just said, because the cost of failure, right, in a consumer, or in at least a Google type environment, is actually none or very small, right? 0 or very small. In our case, that doesn't happen, right? If you have shipped even one product, a service provider customer, AT&T or Verizon, these folks, they expect that you are going to support them for a minimum of 5 years, right? And typically the long tail. So even today, we are supporting products that we built, 15 years ago, or deployed 15 years ago, because that's part of what our customer requires. So we cannot walk away from failures as easily as perhaps a consumer-oriented company.
Same story.
All right, same story on that side. Okay, so let's see. I want to keep track of the time here. I think, here, help me with a time check. So we need time for questions, and I want to know how much more time we can have for discussion before we go to questions.
Well, you guys can go until 8:45, so you guys do it.
We have plenty of time.
Allow time for about 20 minutes also.
Okay, all right. So, I think another really important topic here then is what are the management responsibilities in creating an environment that allows people to start their own ventures? What is we talk a lot about what the innovator has to do, about going after the customer, about attracting the other technical people, about building this momentum, about raising the funds, like all this. What is the management supposed to do? How are they supposed to make it possible?
Maybe I'll take a quick cut at this, and I'll start, and then please add. One fundamental thing is that the company, the management, the company has to figure out a way to encourage, ideas to flow from inside, from outside, wherever. What we have done is two things. One, for internal ideas, there are a number of, I would say, you can call them, contests, where folks from within Cisco are encouraged to contribute ideas, and there's a peer group panel, on different areas that decide, does it make sense? Should it go to the next level and be funded at a certain level? So that's one sort of ideas. Second is, well, most of the smart people are outside of Cisco, right? We only have 70,000 smart people, but billions of smart people outside. So we actually started about 2.5 years ago, this notion called the I Prize, kind of like the X Prize, right? There's an I Prize, I for internet, right? Or innovation. So, but it's internet. So the I Prize is a worldwide, open contest with a first prize of $250,000, and very interesting ideas have come through that. In fact, we have funded a few businesses coming out of that. The most recent win was a bunch of university students in Mexico who essentially created a mechanism to create a profile, for an individual based on what's available in terms of knowledge that the service provider has about them in terms of devices and subscriptions, and things that are in the broader internet, and stitch them together to create a profile which can then be used for ads and so on for targeting things. So those are two examples, and I think that's a critical piece, which is how do you create the mechanisms to generate new ideas. That's something that the management ought to do.
And so it sounds like for Cisco, this kind of competition-based innovation, external or innovation, is very effective. That's a working model that other companies might be doing or could do more. That's your suggestion. Do you want to go? I think I see some interest here.
I'm trying to figure out kind of what angle to answer the question from. You yourself as a manager, and how do you kind of encourage the people that you manage to be more entrepreneurial and take risks and shelter them and give them opportunities from that perspective. And then also, you as the leader of the team, looking to your management to support you, and what do you need from that perspective. I think no matter kind of what level of the organization, my personal belief is you do need to find some place, some manager within the organization that gives you kind of the appropriate sort of funding and shelter and protection to incubate the idea until you have enough critical mass and momentum to be able to for it to take a life of its own, and for it to grow within the organization. And then I think Samir kind of in terms of describing the Google culture, I think that's the necessary characteristics you need to build within your own teams to make sure that you bring the best and you provide the right environment to allow people to succeed. I think that's part of the reason why Michelle made his job easier to some extent for us to be able to do things a little bit under the radar until it was mature enough to actually bring that to the organization.
I do want to say one comment, because this is too much happy talk here. I think it's hard for large companies to properly fund entrepreneurship. Okay, these are I think pretty unique opportunities, and companies try to do it, but bluntly they underfund new ideas in companies. I'm no longer with Cisco, so I can say anything I want. And I love, by the way, I love Cisco. It's a great place if you have an entrepreneurial spirit. I really mean that. But we're given the task as general managers every year, do more with less. And we try to protect those things we want, the innovation and stuff, and new deals that they don't even know about, but we're always given, do more with less. So it's really hard. If we're painting a picture that things are great to try to be an entrepreneur in companies, I think that's misleading. I think we're all trying to do good things, but it's hard.
Yeah, by the way, I completely agree with that. To that end, I'd say there's like three things that we've seen be useful. I've personally seen be useful in helping to create that kind of environment. The first one is time/permission. The second is people, and the third is what I'll just call credit. Who gets the credit? So the time and permission thing, I always thought that, you probably have heard of this 20% time thing at Google. Let me just dispel the myth that I have yet to find an extra 20% in my week. But what it really is it's really 120% time, is the way I like to describe it. And it's permission, actually, to do things that have nothing to do with the project you're assigned to. That's perfectly okay. Which, from the previous company I used to work at, was a major cultural shift. If you had people in late, working late and on the weekend, and they were not working late and on the weekend on the project that we were all working on, that was kind of like, hey, what are you doing? Well, I'm working on this other project over here. Well, why are you helping that team out? You could be working 120% on our project. And I think that Larry and Sergey just kind of said, oh, we're going to have 20% time. And what it did is it created permission for just anyone to do something that wasn't necessarily directly related to their project. And that's pretty cool, and it creates a level of free radical in the organization that you can get people on nights and weekends to build real stuff. And one of the things that isn't talked about much is, while Google is often thought of as a software company, actually more and more we make a lot of hardware, and a lot of the cool hardware things that we do are absolutely from people's 20% time as well. The second one is people. When I'd started two companies, so when I came to Google, I was very nervous. It was a 20,000 person company at the time. It's a big company. Now it's 45,000. At that time, even, I was nervous about coming to a big company. But as a big company, if you want other people who are starting companies, you have to somehow convince them to come there. And one of the things that they were masterful at doing is saying, oh, we all are going to start our next company. We're just at Google to meet the right next set of folks to start our next company with. And we're all here, and this is, by the way, one of the, a person who'd been there 12 years, and she was saying to me that, look, I'm at some point going to go start a company. I'm sure of it. I just like right now, the ideas I have, I can get them better done here than I can somewhere else. And if you don't find that to be the case, you should leave. And maybe you're just here for 6 months or a year, but you'll have met good people and then you leave. That's an interesting pitch. And that kind of turns things on its head to recruit some people that you want. And then the final is credit, and I think this is where things get really hard. You want to take a lot of credit for these things, especially if they're successful, and actually it's completely the wrong thing, because some of the things that start to happen on the slide, which I think the slide is brilliant, start to happen because you are sort of doing this with the idea that you're going to get a lot of the credit. And I think one of the things that's really hard is to basically try to give everybody else the credit. The sales guy that is going to be your big route to market, this is his idea, this is his big thing, this is not your thing. You're just helping him drive. And the more you kind of But in the end, like management really knows who did it. That's the thing that you have to trust. And you just have to pass that along. And that's really hard. I've personally tripped up there several times, and I'm sure it's one of the big reasons why some of these things on the screen happen too.
While you've got the micro, because you're talking about Google culture here, and I kind of wanted to go into the area of how to, things grow to a certain size, and how do they then become mainstream? And I think Google has, at least my understanding is that Google has an approach to this, integrating both that 20% rule with this objectives and key results model. Do you want to take that in terms of where it leaves off from being a 20% thing and where it becomes something that's more top-down and process driven?
It's really hard. I mean, I don't think we're that great at this, actually. I mean, I think that the transition, what I mean is I don't think we're that great at it. It's just hard. It's hard to know, when things are ready. But I mean, generally speaking, we have a process, which a lot of companies have something similar, whether you call it MBOs or objective and key results or whatever. We call them objective and key results, OKRs, and everybody's got them. You write them yourself every quarter. Your team has them. Your super team has them, if you will, and then all the way up. Okay. And we write them basically. A good score on it is a perfect score is a 1.0. A good score on any one particular thing is a 0.7. So you always write them with the idea that they're pretty stretch, and then you grade yourself at a 0.7. You kind of did pretty good. And even if you're doing 20%, often there is a 20% objective. Like people will have a 20% project, and they'll put it on there.
I see.
And you can go and look at anyone's 20% project in the whole company. You can go find mine or whatever, and it can be just about anything. It can be a community service kind of thing that Google's involved in, or it can be, we're going to work on, if you were an electrical engineer, but now you do software and you want to work on the next switch we're building, you can find the guys and do that. There are a set of things that are handed down, though, as strategic priorities. And typically what happens is when some of these things get enough momentum, they get attached to one of those. And again, I emphasize we're not that great at figuring out exactly when, but it happens.
It can happen.
It definitely happens. It definitely happens. And then those things start to kind of have a life of their own and grow tremendously because they're now part of some larger, very strategic priority.
Okay, all right, good. So that's a mechanism for strategic things to find their matches with the bottom-up stuff. I want to keep going with that, transition into the mainstream, and I want to. Yeah. Are we at the right time for that? Yeah. Okay.
So we have Dan, we got a couple of people running mics, so just state who you are, your name, and just ask a question as directly as you can be. Don't give a speech, please. Thank you.
All right. The microphone's coming to you.
Yeah, mic is
To someone it's coming.
Your name and your affiliation, so at least they will aware of you where you come from.
My name is Neeraj Bhatnagar and I'm from Ask.com. One thing I want to say from my personal experience is that from an entrepreneur inside the company versus, let's say, an entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley, one luxury that we don't have is that we cannot go to about 200 venture capitalists and 1,000 angel investors. So we have to go to our own management. So from that point of view, have you seen do you have some experience, or can you relate to this experience that somebody actually went out of the company after getting frustrated and started something, and something on that lines? Do you have something to say?
Okay, so
But just one more thing to add. My company has done very well. I mean, they have helped me a lot with my goals.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question. And I think the question is that if you're outside a company and you're an entrepreneur, you have hundreds of VCs to go find, or angels and so on, to find sources of investment. But if you're inside a company, large company particularly, you really have only your management, right? So have you seen examples where people have become either frustrated or did not find the right receptivity for their ideas and have left. So actually, that's interesting. I just dealt with somebody like that very recently, and they had a great idea, right? Really good idea. We felt that it would make a lot of sense, but we were not ready it was a change in business model, okay, around the consumption model, as how our customers consume our technologies. We were not ready for that, so we actually encouraged him to seek funding outside. And he did, and he found money, and he's starting it in stealth mode at one of the VCs, right? So it happens, right? Now, the only thing you have to be careful of, is you don't want to, enable competition, right? So I think that so you have to be a little bit careful, but a few sort of things which are important is either you build it in your company, go, get it to a friendly VC and have them fund it, and you take an investment stake. That's a second best option. The worst option is that the person who wants to build it inside goes to a competitor and builds it there, right? So whatever you do, you have to avoid that, and I think Cisco does that very well. Our top talent, we don't let them go. We keep them attached in some way or the other, right? Through various mechanisms, including spin-ins. But this happens all the time.
Yeah, I mean, every day. I mean, there's always people that that have ideas, and in some cases, actually, we didn't ask the question. I think, how many people in the audience are actually have started their own companies and now are in large companies? Yeah. So I guess my question maybe is to the people in the audience, what brings you or what keeps you in the large company?
I mean, as a follow-up to my question, I have been successful in creating something inside my company. My team has done. Hopefully, we're going to exciting times.
Because I think the profile of the successful entrepreneur, I think is kind of an interesting thing, right? Because we haven't really talked about what's the upside. What's the I mean, when you start a company outside, there's a tremendous upside. There's more risk, but what is the upside? When you start a venture within the organization.
And the general thought on that is that when you start something on the inside and you make something bigger than it was before, you may not in the end even run that larger thing. It's not quite like you own it, when you're in the company. But the general advice that you get is that from where you are now, by contributing, you will basically end up in a much better situation. Although it happens later, it happens at the end instead of early. Yeah.
So I'm in the startup now, but in my at a previous company, which is a large company, we started our own BU. And Shailesh was mentioning earlier, it takes about 18 months for a system. It's a small BU within a large BU, basically 15, 20 people, and it takes about 18 months to build a box product with the hardware and software. And it so happened that strategically with our competition, we were 10 years behind. It was not groundbreakingly innovative, but we were trying to muster up certain features that made it more innovative for going so late in the market. But right around the launch time, 18 months into it, strategically, so this is what I couldn't understand how the yearly strategy meetings work in these big companies is, you go do your tactical execution and you execute to your goal, you even beat the 18 months by a month or so, and right when you're about to launch, they lift their hands and then say, strategically we want to be out of this. They dissolve the whole thing after spending how many millions of dollars, which is not a very big amount. But going back to the Google gentleman's point, that point where you want to dissolve it, it's a hard decision, and it's strictly based on why did you get into it 2 years ago and why do you want to get out now is something that's why is strategy revised, a 3 to 5 year strategy revised on a yearly basis?
Because the market is not static, right? Things change, right? And the space and speed of change is now increasing in every market, right? So, and maybe the other thing is that also, you didn't mention this, but management changes also. There are other folks who may come in with different priorities and views on the strategic imperatives.
In the case of, I think, the enterprise software or enterprise customers, the worst situation is, when you have, just one or two customers and you're left supporting this for 9 years and you've got this big commitment.
I have a question now. So I was part of a large company. Wait till the microphone comes to you, sir. Yeah.
Actually, right behind you, there's a guy with a microphone, and you can get it next.
So I had a quick question. My name is Vikram. I used to have my own company, part of a larger company. And I've been asked to drive more innovation, bring more innovation into the new company. One of the struggles I'm having is the motivation and reward system. Because it was real clear, cutting through a lot of the bullshit, people work the hours they do at a startup because there's a payoff, right? And I think, Shailesh, like you mentioned, that at Cisco, one of the ways that was accomplished was via the spin-out, spin-in. Do you guys have any suggestions or things you know that have worked or not worked in terms of motivation and reward systems in larger organizations?
I can start. For us, that demographic that seems to work for us are people that are either kind of like yourself that have done startups, but are in a portion of their lives where they're kind of in a larger organization, that they like that experience and they want to do something, they want to make an impact. And then the other people that we find are people that have been at SAP for a long time, want to taste the startup life, but aren't quite willing to kind of make that leap yet. Or people that are leaving, that are like SAP but are frustrated with the situation and see this as kind of a last opportunity to kind of do something really impactful. That's kind of the intersection, and if you're able to do that, and for these things, for people to kind of be motivated to work, you have to have a higher purpose than just what the day-to-day things are. So we try, in the types of projects that we do, we try to go beyond just the traditional things. SAP's motto is to kind of make businesses run better, and for our consumer applications, the motto is really to make lives better in terms of the consumer applications. So a lot of people are just really passionate about the apps that we're building. That's what motivates people to put in more hours.
Just one comment. It's a good thing that money is not the only driver. If it were, we would all be in trouble, right? But that's why the spin-in model has worked really well, because it does, as I was saying earlier, works for everybody, right? All the pieces, all the stakeholders. The other, of course, good thing is in big companies is that you have RSUs to hand out, right? So if you can disproportionately use RSUs, use a disproportionate level of RSUs to reward entrepreneurial activity, that happens in our company quite a bit.
I would just add, and I think this absolutely depends on the space a little bit, but obviously what motivates people is different. I think the financial component is important, but also there's a lot of times in our organization, which is I would run the product organization. A lot of times you have folks who I believe actually a larger company like Google is a better platform for them personally to make a go at this whatever it is that they're trying to do than externally. So for example, when you are part of a Google and you show up at a conference to speak about something, you tend to get more people who want to pay attention. Okay, and that is something that you can offer to one of these folks and say, like, look, this is a big platform for you, and actually you're the guy at Google doing this, and that does mean something. Whether you actually succeed or fail, you're going to build a lot of credibility in the space. We have a lot of people who leave Google and start other companies later. A lot of those people who are unsuccessful in doing more or less the same thing, learned why it didn't work, decided to go start something somewhere else. That's just a cost of business that we live with. But the connections, the industry knowledge, the entire network that they built up through that process is a well-known takeaway that they have. And it's a huge motivator, at least for product.
So I had a question which revolves around the culture of the parent organization and this new BU or this new small team that you're trying to form. So just relating to one of my experiences, which is part of a large company, went to a new line of business. The culture which I found in the large company, they were happy with a 10-15% growth. But in the small BU, you were looking at a 2x, 3x growth. and most of the team in this new BU was in that 10-15% mode. So how do you, like, how do you first of all pick people for this new unit, from your Cisco experience or any other experience, and how do you kind of change the culture in this new unit from being a steady growth company to an aggressive growth company?
Yeah, maybe if I could show a slide.
In case you guys are interested in baseball, Giants are winning 8-1 and top of the ninth, okay?
All right.
8-1.
World Series, while he's bringing the slides up, okay?
So look, for us, there were a couple things. We had our executives set goals that were completely unrealistic, and because of that, because the goals were so high, it completely required a mind shift change, right? How do we build applications that reach tens of millions of users? I mean, that's different from the traditional enterprise software that SAP does. It's different, obviously different from consumer software. How do you build things in 90 days as opposed to a year and a half? And how do you scale these things? But the radical goals actually required, that was actually easier for us to kind of get change done through the organization, because if you're doing incremental things, then it fit nicely into these existing processes. But since the goals were so radical, the process people said, threw their hands up in the air and says, okay, these are so different, we have to start from scratch. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was we completely, we built, these are SAP locations, right? This is, this is the Palo Alto App House location. So, this is not what your typical SAP office would look like. So again, it's somewhat self-selecting. It's really important to bring the right people in, and we wanted to create an environment where people would behave and act more like a startup. So when we brought people to this environment, you either said this is great, or you said this is not for me. So that's important, and I think it's said over and over, kind of in entrepreneurial teams and things like that. It's so important to bring in the right people and to make sure that the wrong people don't bring in the team, because one person that doesn't fit the culture really drags down kind of the culture of the team. What's that? You signed Greg. That's
It can't be far.
yeah. Here, we're right next door to sushi. Sushi can't be startup.
Just, I agree completely with what you said. I think the other thing is that, you will not always find these people inside the organization, so you have to infuse it with external talent, with different DNA. And that's something that we are in the process of doing.
All right, more questions? There's one.
Well, you talked about variety of personalities that you need to spot and then try to figure out what motivates them, right? So how do you spot those people? If you're in the management and if you have 60,000 people working for your company, how do you go about spotting those kinds of emotions or emotions that you're trying to figure out?
And if I understand, you're basically saying, how do you spot the entrepreneurial types within your company?
Or even for motivational rewards, or even trying to figure out what motivates these individuals. How do you spot those qualities?
Okay, all right. Who wants to take that? I'm the moderator, I just wanted to know that.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understood the question actually. So is it how to spot the particular qualities in folks that will motivate them, or is it how to spot the folks that will make a team environment, like for an entrepreneurial idea or concept?
Both.
Sort of walked into that.
Well, why don't you start with spotting the people, and then you can go down one of those.
Sure. I mean, simple thing that I've seen work really well. We talked about making time, right? Okay. So one of the things we do twice a year is we have a set of what we call demo days, and we basically give the engineering team 2 to 3 weeks to just come up with stuff. And then at the end of that, we do a set of demos. And the expectation is that most of the stuff is not going to go too far. Okay, and so we set that up front. But that's a lot of time if you think about the whole year. I mean, 2 to 3 weeks is a significant amount of time. But if you do that, not everyone takes advantage of it, A, and then B, the people who do and who come up with great stuff, they're sitting right in front of you. And we find that works really well.
I mean, for me, it's, you know, when you know the people and, you know, they have conviction about the work they do, when they have passion about work they do, that they care about it, and, you know, and you get in arguments with them, you know, people have their own, you know, who think they're right and will push you to defend that. To me, those are the entrepreneurial types, right? Because they're willing to do something a little bit different. They're not going to settle for what you're doing.
Yeah, I think, you know, see, entrepreneurs have, or entrepreneurial people have ideas. So the best way to kind of spot entrepreneurs is to create a forum where ideas can come up, right? One is the demo days, which is actually we do the same thing, right? In fact, it was just held last month, where there were probably 100 plus demos that people created. Second is, I don't want to, I want to repeat this because it should not be underemphasized, this notion of contests with a prize. I think these things work, I'm telling you, this stuff works. We typically on the, even in our own BU, I had a contest, right? And things actually, it's very interesting. People come up with some very interesting ideas when they know there's no, if you will, consequence associated with except it may be a prize, right? There's nobody who's going to ding you because you came up with an idea. So people come out with ideas. So actually it's just creating the forum to enable the ideas to come out.
I think in our case, we try to keep everything beneath the radar for as long as we could until we were able to kind of show some success. But once we were able to show some initial success and people started to hear about, hey, there was an offsite that nobody really knew about, the people that are very entrepreneurial kind of self-selected and say, how do I join this team? How do I learn more about it? So it kind of built momentum as we were able to show a little bit of success.
I mean, I think the traditional things you're looking for are, and we've all kind of said basically, a can-do attitude, an optimist. You're not looking for somebody who says, here's the 30 reasons I can't do it, right? So somebody who is an optimist, somebody who is prone to action, right? So he'll act on something, right? And to me, so the passion about what he's doing. So those kinds of things, just in, if you know somebody, if you sit in meetings with them, you know the kind of personality you're looking for.
One thing so first of all, I like a lot of these comments, both in terms of the competition side and the doing side coming out. I wanted to just relay something in one of our courses, in one of our Berkeley courses. We had a speaker actually from Applied Materials, and they, in this presentation, and I don't think that this is across all of Applied, but in this particular presentation, they talked about a couple of things that they do in terms of profiling people in the organization. And one of the axes of profile was something they call the say-do ratio. So it's basically how much do you talk about things that you're going to do versus how much do you do and just like show what you do. And I think that's it's another way of basically talking about, well, is this person a doer or is this person a person who talks about what they will do? I think that gets to your entrepreneurial point. The other one is there's also a bit of profiling that can be done between people who do what they're told and people who ask you why they're supposed to do what they're told. And of course the people who ask the why are the more irritating from the management point of view. But they're actually the ones you want, because the ones who are just doing whatever they've been told to do are not those entrepreneurial types. So that's just some ideas to add on to the comments of the panel. We got a question right here. Oh, wait, here. Amit,
Yeah, so some of you touched on this in some sense of innovator's dilemma. So do you sometimes find yourself looking at ideas from within these large companies that may actually cannibalize some of your existing product lines. And the fear is that if you don't, let's say if you want to do a low-cost solution to emerging markets, somebody else might step in and do it for you. And how do you fight those battles from those existing BUs and product line B folks?
I think we touched on many of these things already, right? We keep them separate, right? Make sure that there is, senior management support, right? I think make sure that there is, customer pull, right? So these are all the elements that we talked about.
There's one more that I would add. So there's just one more thing I would add we probably didn't talk about is sometimes it's good to instill a healthy sense of fear. I mean, it's basically like, look, X, Y, and Z are going to do this. Do you want to be relevant or do you want to be irrelevant? And then point to whatever other company in your particular industry fell by the wayside. Because this kind of stuff happens all the time. It doesn't matter what company it is. And sometimes it's inspiration that motivates, and sometimes there's an element of fear, which is very helpful.
I still think the innovator's dilemma is still there. I mean, it's the problem that big companies face. So you can't solve it completely. It's going to happen. There are lots of examples I could name about that happening right now.
In our case, it took the chairman himself to step in and say, we're going to do this even though it's going to kill this business for the next year and a half.
I'll have a quick question. I know that everyone is stopping for watching the Giants win, but a quick question. And this question is personally for you, Samir, Sam, and because you guys have started a company right from scratch, and there's some kind of motivation that it's difficult to bring it while you're working at companies. And especially in this booming market, when the market is ripe, there's a lot of money around you. You can go raise the money. You can go raise the money. Market is right, and as well, you're already working at a good organization. You have the team intact. You already have the team all built in. So what's the motivation of these people to stay inside the organization? One of the points you touched upon is learning from the failure. But the market is always not present, so you try to do it for the first time.
Motivation. I can talk about my personal motivation and what I look for people that are going to join the teams. And it's kind of the question I was asking, how many people are entrepreneurs, and why are you kind of in a
And just to clarify, the question is, what motivates you to do something inside the company?
Exactly. Like, what motivates this entrepreneurial type of person to stay inside the company and do that, as compared to going outside and creating a business out of it?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's I look for people that want to make an impact in the world, right? Impact can be defined in different ways, but in the startup world outside the organization, you have to be very, very good. You have to be very, very lucky, and you have to have the timing just right sometimes. And a lot of the times, there's a lot of failure, and even if you have a great idea, sometimes you're unable to really make that impact. Whereas kind of, I think at all of our companies, we have the reach and the breadth. At SAP, I think they always quote this thing like 60% of the world's GDP goes through SAP systems. So even if you're able to kind of do something small, you're able to really kind of reach impact at a global level. And that's what I personally feel is the reason I'm at SAP. And I look for people that kind of want to have that same kind of large impact in the world.
Yeah, and there was, I'll let you go in a second, but I'm really just trying to reiterate points. And so a little bit of the conversation before, which was using the company as a platform, you basically are saying in another way that you can make more impact in the world by leveraging the platform instead of what you can do separately.
That's right. It's really sort of the investment, infrastructure, and impact, right? There's the big company does give you the money to go make this happen.
Yeah.
There's an infrastructure to allow you to, maybe even succeed, and the ability to scale your ideas and then make a big impact. I think that's the way to look at it.
So I'll answer it another way from my perspective. And then actually, I've done 5 startups, and I would, and I'll make a comment about Cisco, but I've done 5 startups, and I've gone from company to company when I got bored. So when I didn't think I had the impact, or when I wasn't learning anything new, or something. So I was looking for something for the next challenge, really. that's when I would go from company to company. Now, I'm retired now, but if I'd say to Cisco, like I said, I think Cisco's a great place, and I would have stayed at Cisco to do another challenge, to go into a new BU, do a new emerging technology, just to show I can do something new. So that's what a company can do for you, is that I could leverage my position as a VP, and I could do another BU. So that's another reason you would stay there, is that you leverage basically the credibility you have in the company, the success you have in the company, and the network you have in the company to do something new. So that's what I would have stayed if I hadn't retired.
I agree with all that. I mean, I think it's about, for a lot of folks at Google anyway, it is about scale. It's you just can't do some of these things at the same level of scale, and that makes a big difference. It's not just, it is the scale of the infrastructure, but it's also the scale of the kinds of parties you can bring together as a big company. A lot of the hard, challenging problems, at least in my area, are about, I'll use the word, apologies for using such this silly lingo, but it's